folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where it's time for part 7 of the Calico Mountain expansion. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I did the final sculpt and scenic painting on all of this rockwork.
Using Sculptamold and acrylic paints, I'll show you my process for modeling the colorful and rocky scenery of the American Southwest.
These next few steps are a little messy, so once again I'll be protecting all the visible track with some masking tape. Now, the product I'll be using to finish out the rockwork is called Sculptamold. It's a mixture of plaster and cellulose. Here you can see what it looks like when it's dry. So it's kind of like plaster and paper mache mixed together, so you get that a little more body than you would get with just regular plaster. It's made by Amigos, the American art clay company. I buy it online, usually through Amazon, and I got a huge, like 50-pound bag of it because I don't like to run out. And what I like to do is mix this up in small batches. This is a little more than a cup, and mix it up in small batches in trays like this, and just enough water to get it wet all the way through. What you want is kind of a thick paste. At least that's what I want. Now, this is the fun part, just like making mud pies when you're a kid. You don't want to add too much water. Just enough. Mix it around. A little more. The runnier it is, the harder it is to apply to the scenery. So you don't want to add too much water. Just enough to make a nice thick paste. Should hold together on its own. See, like that. That's pretty much what you want right there. Now, to apply the Sculptamold, I like to work in small sections, usually just a couple of feet at a time. And one of the best tools I've found for applying the Sculptamold recently is good old popsicle sticks. Works great. Of course, you also have to use your hands quite a bit, so your hands are going to get messy. And I just plop it right on to the foam like this and start to blend it in. And what I'm trying to do here is fill in mostly the cracks, the layers, the visible lines here between the layers of foam to remove that stacked foam look. If there's any nice rock carving that I've done earlier with the Dremel, I'm usually just going to let that show through. I might put a very, very thin veneer of Sculptamold over the top to give it some texture, but mostly I'm going to want to let this this show through, but you'll see as we go along. And I take the popsicle sticks and stick them in a little water, get them wet, and then you can go and really start to move this stuff around. Not only smooth it out, but you can actually sculpt facets into the Sculptamold. Make little rock shapes. And the more random, the better. Now, once I have all the Sculptamold from a particular batch applied, that's the time you want to go back with your wet popsicle stick. You can also use a butter knife, or if you're artistic, you can use a palette knife and go in and kind of, and do some sculpting on it. And as it sets up, you'll still be able to do it. Pretty good working time on this, 45 minutes to an hour, depending on what the humidity is like in your area. And this is when I really like to go in and just kind of smooth things out. And and as it sets up, it gets easier and easier to add those rock facets. give it a try and you'll see what I mean. Trying to echo and enhance what I've already put in here with carving in the foam. One nice thing about this product, as opposed to plaster, if you've ever tried to put wet plaster on top of dry plaster, what you'll find is that the dry plaster will suck all the moisture out, and they won't. It's hard to get them to stick to each other unless you wet down the dry plaster first. With Sculptamold, you don't have that problem. You can smooth new stuff right over the top of the old stuff. No problem whatsoever. I want to show you a couple of my other favorite tools for this besides the good old popsicle sticks. One is a big flat brush, so you can poke the Sculptamold back into the nooks and crannies, and you can also give it a little bit of a texture just by poking it like that. But my all-time favorite tool for working with this is this good old Bob Ross palette knife. It's got a great shape. You can like get a big scoop and trowel it on there and then shape it. So it's great for making handy little, happy little trees and happy little rocks too. I think that's going to do it. Let this dry overnight and come back and get some paint on these rocks. Well, now that that Sculptamold is all nice and dry, it's time to get started on the scenic painting, which is my favorite part of the whole process. Right here, I have that same medium background shade that I mixed up for doing the backdrop, and that's what I'm going to put on first. I'm going to give all of these rocks a nice coating of this color, and then we let that dry and move on to the next step. So first things first, let's get some color on here. not much I can do now except sit back, relax, and wait for that paint to dry. Well, I'll let this dry for a little more than an hour. And so now we're ready for the next step, which is to spray everything with some diluted black. This is black acrylic paint diluted with a whole bunch of water in a spray bottle. And you spray it on to darken all the cracks and crevices, get it back into all the nooks and crannies, and darken all those shadows. So that's what we're going to do now. Now, at long last, I finally get to start rendering the rockwork. And for that, I'll be using a lighter scenery base color. It's a shade lighter than this one I started with. And my favorite big filbert brush. And a nice stiff flat brush. And what I want to do is just go around and hit the tops of the rocks. This isn't really dry brushing. Now we're getting closer to what the final color of the rockwork is going to be. So I'm just hitting the tops of the texture. And just like when we painted the backdrop, I'm starting in the middle and then going lighter, darker, doing the lighter highlights, and then the shadows, working our way from the middle up to the final look. You see that this color is much closer to the actual color of Calico Mountain. So there's a method to my madness after all. Just hitting the tops. Just like that. Okay, just got to do the whole thing. As you can see, that color dries a shade darker, and when on it looked pretty bright, but as it dries, it starts to blend in a little bit. And it looks a little bit more muted. I mean, there's still a lot of more details showing now. But in the next step, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my darker scenery base, which is this kind of terracotta color, and some burnt umber and some red oxide, and go in and just blend in some shadows, different colors, just to give it a little bit more variation. So I'll come up someplace like this, where there's a line, around, blend that down. And how do we blend it? What do we do if it gets too dark? Well, go back to our light scenery color and blend it right on there. This is how I paint all of my scenery, and people often ask if I use an airbrush. Nope, just a brush blended right on the scenery like that. You want something a little bit more striking, get some of that red oxide in there. A little bit goes a long way. Some of that down here. Just like that. So I'll go around now and do that in a lot of different places, kind of carry these straddle lines across where they make sense. And then go and put in the final highlights. then go in and add the final highlights by mixing some unbleached titanium with my lighter scenery base color. And this you just want to kind of dry brush on. Well, I think that's good enough for now. Now it's time to clean the track and see if the train's still running. Well, all right. I think I'll call that a success. Pretty pleased with the way this turned out. Now I can't wait to get to the next part, which will be modeling Calico Creek right here. But that's a future episode. We'll have to wait a little bit for that. Until then, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Adios for now.